My name is Elizabeth. They say loyalty is rewarded, that if you stay quiet, follow the rules, protect the family name, you'll be loved back. I used to believe that. I bent myself into 1,000 polite versions, all for them. But on the night my father stood up with a wine glass in hand and shattered everything I thought was sacred, I realized some betrayals are rehearsed. Long before the curtain rises, we were all there, draped in Sunday smiles and wine-soaked warmth, pretending nothing had ever gone wrong. The house I grew up in still smelled like lemon polish and my mother's vanilla potpourri. The dining room shimmered with polished silver and brittle tension. Extended cousins clinked glasses, my Aunt Cheryl made her usual passive-aggressive jokes, and my brother Brian, my only ally, or so I thought, sat beside me with his foot tapping too fast under the table. It was supposed to be a celebration. My new nonprofit had just partnered with a regional shelter program. A big deal. Months of sleepless nights, strategy calls, and compromise. My parents, David and Linda, insisted we mark it with dinner, family only. To show support, my mother had said with that familiar, syrupy edge. But halfway through the roast chicken, my father stood up, glass in hand. That's how betrayals begin in our house, behind toasts. Before we finish dessert, he said, voice calm as ever, there's something that needs to be addressed. The room hushed. You could hear the creak of Aunt Cheryl shifting in her seat. Then, his eyes locked onto mine, cold, final. Elizabeth, he said, we know it was you who leaked our private discussions online. The comments you posted in those forums. Shameful. My breath stopped. Leaked? Comments? What? My heart slammed so loudly I didn't catch the rest. Something about family reputation. Something about betrayal. My mother didn't look up. She just picked at her napkin like it was a puzzle piece she couldn't fit. I managed a whisper. I didn't. What are you talking about? We've seen the evidence, he replied. No one asked for an explanation. No one asked if it was true. Brian looked away. I was told, before dessert, to pack my things and leave. My own father's voice, the same one that once read me bedtime stories about brave girls and gentle kings, now delivering exile with the same tone he used to order dry cleaning. My slice of cheesecake sat untouched as I stood, every eye in that room trying not to meet mine. It wasn't until I stepped outside, my heels hitting the stone walkway in a blur of rage and heartbreak, that I realized I didn't even have a house key anymore. Can you imagine that? Being celebrated one moment, then erased like a typo at your own family table? The worst part wasn't that they believed I'd done it, it was that they'd been waiting for the excuse. And somehow I knew this wasn't sudden. This had been planned. I always thought rock bottom would come with more noise. But instead, it was the soft hum of an unfamiliar fridge in a coworker's spare room. The ache of sleeping in clothes you didn't plan to stay in. The sting of checking the family group chat only to see you'd been removed. First night, I stayed with Michelle, someone from the admin team at the shelter org. We weren't close, but she offered, awkwardly, like she was doing her civic duty. You can take the couch, just for a few days. A few days turned into a week, then 2. I never unpacked, just folded things back into my bag like I was always ready to run. Because a part of me believed I could fix this, that I just needed time to prove I hadn't posted anything, that this was a misunderstanding, an email mix-up maybe, or some troll using my name. I filed a defamation report on the forums, reached out to the moderators. Nothing came back. In the meantime, I tried to keep working, keep smiling. I showed up to donor meetings and public events with a practiced calm, while inside I was unraveling. But even there, the whispers started. Something about internal family drama being all over the private Facebook groups. That maybe I shouldn't be leading the shelter expansion if I couldn't manage my own family. I laughed it off. What else could I do? Cry on a podium? One night, after another failed attempt at calling Brian, his voicemail still that lazy, infuriating, "Hey, leave it." I opened a browser tab out of habit and typed in our old address. There it was. My childhood home, listed for sale. New photos. A drone shot of the manicured lawn, the porch swing I used to read on, now staged with rented furniture like we never lived there. And in the details, owner, David and Linda Harper. No mention of me, no stake, no claim, like I had never mattered, like they were erasing every brick of my belonging. I called my father, straight to voicemail, called my mother. She picked up, then said, "I'm at Pilates," and hung up. My hands shook, my throat dried out. I stared at that listing for what felt like hours. I wasn't just cut off, I was being scrubbed out. But why? What was so damaging that they'd rather pretend I never existed? I needed help, real help. That's when I remembered Gabriel Sloan, technically. A friend from college, who now worked private security and did freelance investigative work on the side. We hadn't talked in years, but he'd always been the fixer type. Quiet, brilliant, a little too observant for comfort. I texted him, "Gabe, I need to prove I didn't leak anything. Can we talk?" He replied within the hour. The next morning, I met him at a tiny cafe just outside the city. No small talk. Just Gabe in a gray hoodie, sipping black coffee, eyes sharp as ever. "I've seen weirder setups," he said after I finished my rambling explanation. "But this one's deliberate." Deliberate, that word stayed with me. It confirmed what I already feared. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a setup. He agreed to take a look. Emails, forum activity, my laptop, my cloud backups. I handed everything over. "Be honest," I told him. "If I messed up somewhere, tell me. I just want the truth." He nodded. "I'll find it, whatever it is." I left that cafe a little lighter. Hope was a fragile thing, but it flickered that day. Until I got back to Michelle's and opened my email. There it was. A message from our family firm's real estate division, not addressed to me, forwarded by mistake, confirming removal of Elizabeth's name from archival property documents. Per instruction, all assets remain under David and Linda Harper. No outstanding claim remains. It hit like a slap. Not just exile, erasure. I wasn't just out of the house, I was out of the legacy. And that's when I stopped waiting for apologies. I would clear my name, but I was no longer doing it to come home. I was doing it to find out why they wanted me gone in the first place. 2 weeks later, Gabe called. His voice was flat, analytical, like he was reading off a grocery list, not unraveling my entire past. "I traced the first forum post to an IP address," he said. "Not yours, not public either. Registered to a user at Green Hollow Community HOA. I blinked. "The neighborhood association?" "Yep. Same one your mom volunteers at, right?" My mouth went dry. I hadn't thought of that group in years. When I was a teenager, my mother used it like a hobby, planning flower drives, potlucks, and passive-aggressive newsletters about trash bins. She loved the illusion of control it gave her. "You're saying the leak came from inside there?" "Not just the leak, the narrative." Gabe forwarded screenshots, not from public forums, but from internal message chains between community leaders. The threads stretched back 6 months. All about me. It's a shame when family drama spills into the workplace. I hear Elizabeth's nonprofit is having internal conflict too. Sometimes, entitlement begins at home. The comments were casual, vague enough to be legal, and utterly poisonous. "Your mom never used her name," Gabe said. "But she had an assistant, Debbie Kerr. Every message came from her account." Debbie, of course. The assistant, who always smiled a little too wide at parties, who once told me I reminded her of someone who thinks too hard. "You think my mom dictated them?" I asked. "I think Debbie doesn't move without her blessing." The truth settled like cement in my gut. This wasn't just exile, it was a campaign. She had laid the groundwork for months, softening my image around town like dough under a rolling pin. Quietly, politely, surgically. She turned me into a liability. Before I ever opened my mouth, why? Why would my own mother need to ruin me in advance? I didn't confront her. Not yet. There was something too neat about all of it. Like she wanted me to come asking. And I wouldn't give her the satisfaction. Instead, I buried myself in records. Business emails, committee minutes, old texts with Brian that now read like code. And I found something. An exchange between my brother and our cousin Jeanette from 2 years ago. "We should just pull the trigger now. She's not going to forgive us anyway." "Forgive what?" My mind spun, but I didn't have time to wallow, because Gabe found one more thing. That original forum post, he said. The one your dad referenced? I nodded, my heart already bracing. It wasn't about the family. It was an article about nonprofit ethics. Someone forwarded it to your mom's work email. Debbie sent it on, but her forward included a typo. Your name in the subject line. My hands started shaking. You're saying? It was never yours. You didn't write it. Your name just got tagged in a chain because of one bad forward, and your parents ran with it. I laughed, sharp, bitter, a mistake. My life shattered over a clerical error. But then, why hadn't they checked? Why hadn't Brian told them? Why had they waited for this one moment to cut me out? Unless this wasn't about the leak at all. This was the excuse. The blade they'd been sharpening behind closed doors. I closed my laptop slowly, breathing like someone trying not to break glass. And for the first time since that dinner, I stopped grieving. This wasn't just betrayal. This was design. And I was going to unravel every inch of it. It was raining the night I finally saw Brian, which felt, somehow, appropriate. He still lived in that upscale condo complex near the water, minimalist decor, expensive appliances, no signs of actual life, like a hotel suite you're not allowed to get too comfortable in. I buzzed the intercom, heart thudding. He let me in after only a pause. When the door opened, Brian stood there barefoot, holding a glass of whiskey like it was a peace offering. "Elle?" he said softly, like I was some memory crawling out of childhood instead of the sister he'd helped disappear. "Can I come in?" I asked. He stepped aside. No resistance, just guilt, swimming behind tired eyes. I didn't waste time. I dropped my umbrella, sat on the gray leather couch, and stared at him. I know Mom set me up. I know the leak was fake. I know Debbie's email caused it, and she never corrected it. And I know none of you wanted to fix it. Brian sat across from me, sinking slowly into the chair like his bones had aged a decade in minutes. He didn't deny it. That alone nearly broke me. "You could have told them," I said. "You could have said it wasn't me." He swallowed, hard. "I tried. They didn't want to hear it." "You didn't try hard enough." Silence stretched like wire between us. Finally, he set the whiskey down, rubbed his face, and said the thing I didn't know I'd been waiting to hear. "They were going to cut you out anyway." The air left the room. I blinked. What? The leak, it just made it easier, cleaner. But Mom and Dad had been talking about it for months. Ever since that legal dispute with the advisory board at your job. I felt my pulse spike. "That was resolved," I said. "I wasn't even named in the complaint." "I know. But it was enough. They were afraid any future scandal could link back to the family business. Their names, their friends, their status." I sat back, numb. "You're telling me they were planning to disinherit me over something I wasn't even responsible for?" He nodded. "They wanted to avoid the risk. They were already documenting things, building a file." I could barely hear him through the rush in my ears. "A file?" He stood then, walked to the hall closet, returned with a folder. "I wasn't supposed to keep this," he said, "but I did." Inside were printed HR memos, emails, performance notes I'd never seen before. Elizabeth's attitude during board meetings remains combative. Failed to follow procedural budget outlines. Multiple tardy entries logged. 2022. Lies. Fabricated timelines. Doctored reprimands. I stared at the pages like they were evidence from someone else's trial. "This is how they justified firing me?" I whispered. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. I looked up at him. My brother. My confidant for so many years. The one who'd once held my hand through grief when our grandmother passed. "How long have you known?" I asked. Brian's voice cracked. "Since February." It was June. 4 months. 4 months of silence while my life unraveled. "Why didn't you warn me?" He sank to the floor beside the couch, head in his hands. "I thought if you were out, you'd be free. That maybe it would be better for you than always trying to live by their rules. I didn't think they'd go this far. I didn't think they'd lie." "You didn't think," I said quietly. "You just let them." I wanted to scream, to throw something, but all I did was close the folder and slide it into my bag. Brian looked up, eyes red. "I'm sorry, Elle." I stood. Not enough. Then I walked out. Not because I was done hurting, but because I finally knew who had been holding the knife. I thought I'd felt betrayal before, that dinner. the fake leak. My name scraped from the deed like graffiti. But betrayal has layers, and some only show when you look too closely at paper trails. I didn't sleep after leaving Brian's. I went straight to a 24-hour print shop, copied every page of the personnel file he gave me, and then locked the originals in my bag like they were dynamite. The next morning, I walked through the front doors of Harper & Sons, the family firm that bore our name but no longer bore my presence. I hadn't been there since they removed me, no warning, no meeting, just an email on a Tuesday saying my contract had been mutually dissolved. They'd used language that sounded like collaboration but felt like eviction. Now I was back. The receptionist, a new girl named Lila, froze when she saw me. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. "I have an appointment," I said calmly. "With human resources." She nodded, uncertain. "Right this way." The HR office hadn't changed. Same fake ficus in the corner. Same framed posters about team synergy. Except now, the head of HR was a man named Clark Finney, a former classmate of Brian's. Quiet, mild-mannered. The kind of man who played things safe. Unless told otherwise, he greeted me with a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Elizabeth, I wasn't expecting." "I'm here about my personnel file?" I interrupted. "I need to review the original." Clark shifted. "Well, your file is archived, and since your employment ended, I have a right to review any documentation used to terminate me, especially if it's been falsified." That got his attention. He blinked, slowly. "I'm sorry?" I pulled out my copy, laid the pages on his desk like cards in a high-stakes game. "These were used to justify firing me, right? Tardiness, poor conduct, budget missteps." Clark said nothing. "Funny thing is," I continued, "I have emails showing I was on time, screenshots of budget approvals, and witnesses from those board meetings who say I was the only one asking the hard questions." Still silence. I leaned in. "Tell me, Clark, who asked you to sign off on these? My father? My mother? Or was it just easier to play along because they promised you a promotion?" His jaw tightened. "I'm not accusing you," I said, voice gentler. "I'm giving you a chance to come clean before this becomes very public." He looked down. The silence that followed was louder than shouting. Finally, he exhaled. "They asked me to clean up the file, said it was a formality, that the optics needed to align. They gave me the edits. I just copied and filed." "So you knew," I said softly, "that they were lying?" "I thought they had their reasons. They always do." I gathered the papers back into my bag. "Elizabeth," he said, almost pleading, "what are you going to do with this?" I stood, straightened my coat, looked him in the eye. "I don't know yet, but I promise you, Clark, whatever I do next will be the truth." He didn't stop me, didn't offer excuses, because deep down, he knew what I did. They'd never intended to let me stay. They'd spent months crafting an exit, one they could explain in legal language and office memos. One that wouldn't get messy, and if it hadn't been for Brian's guilt, I never would have known how deep the rot ran. As I stepped into the cold afternoon, file pressed to my chest, I realized something terrifying and freeing. I had no home, no title, no legacy left to protect. But I had the truth. And the truth is a dangerous thing, especially when the people who buried it are afraid of what it might expose. I thought truth would be enough. I thought if I walked into the right room, held up the right papers, looked the right people in the eyes, they'd see. I didn't expect applause. I didn't even expect apologies. But I expected something. Instead, I got silence. And worse, denial. The press conference was small. Local journalists, shelter staff, a few community members who had followed the whispers but wanted facts. Gabe helped me organize it. We booked a room at the Civic Center, neutral and clean. I wore navy, a color that said I was serious, not angry. I printed copies of the falsified HR memos, the email headers, and the community forum transcripts. I told my story, plain, unembellished, how a misdirected email spiraled into exile, how my personnel file had been doctored, how my family, terrified of optics, had decided I was expendable. And then I waited. I remember the moment clearly, the pause after I finished, people shifting in their seats, a reporter scribbling in the back, a man in a sport coat clearing his throat. Then someone asked, "Do you have a statement from the company confirming this?" "No," I said. "They haven't responded." Another voice, "Have any employees corroborated your claims on the record?" "I have an audio recording of Clark Finney admitting he altered the files. But he didn't attend today. He's afraid of retaliation." Murmurs. The woman from Channel 4 narrowed her eyes. "So your only source is your brother? Who's still employed by the firm?" I realized, in that moment, the room had already made up its mind. Or rather, someone made it up for them. Later that night, Gabe told me what I didn't see coming. "Clark's pulled a full reversal," he said. "Issued a statement saying no files were tampered with. Called your claims an emotional misinterpretation of internal documentation." I couldn't speak. "He's been promoted," Gabe added. "VP of Compliance." Of course he had. He took the deal. A bigger office. A clean conscience scribbled out with a bonus check. My chest felt hollow, like someone had scooped out the parts that used to believe in systems and facts and paper trails. "They paid him off," I said flatly. "Most likely." "I gave them everything," I whispered, and it still wasn't enough. Gabe looked at me then, not with pity, but with a kind of reverent sadness. "That's the part they never tell you," he said. "The truth doesn't always beat the lie, not when the lie has money." I sat in that silence for a long time after he left. It's one thing to be accused falsely. It's another to prove your innocence and still be disbelieved. Worse yet, watched as the people who destroyed your name rewrite the ending. They were winning, and not because they were right, but because they had the resources to make their version stick. I stared out the window of the borrowed apartment I'd moved into. Raindrops raced down the glass like desperate runners in a losing race. I thought about giving up, not because I was tired, but because I didn't know what else I could lose. Then I remembered something from years ago. An intern we'd taken on at the firm. Quiet girl, brilliant, always asking too many questions, always scribbling things down. I hadn't thought about her in forever, until I saw her face on a news segment the next morning, smiling nervously as she introduced a segment on corporate transparency for a national investigative show. Her name was Allison Ford. And suddenly, something in me lit up again. A whisper, sharp and dangerous. What if she knew where the bodies were buried too? I hadn't spoken to Allison Ford in years. She was still in college when she interned at Harper & Sons, one of those whip-smart, sharp-eyed girls who said little but noticed everything. I remembered liking her, trusted her even. So when I saw her face on the news that morning, standing in front of City Hall with a microphone and that quiet steel in her expression, I didn't hesitate. I found her public email, sent a message with the subject line, "I think you remember what they buried." 3 hours later, my phone rang. "Elizabeth?" she said. Her voice had matured, but it was still unmistakably her. "Hi, Allison. I'm not sure if you saw my—" "I remember," she cut in gently. "Everything." Those 2 words made my throat close up. She invited me to her office, a modest suite in a shared media building downtown. There was a stack of folders on one side of her desk, 2 recorders on the other, coffee cups, Post-its, energy. Allison stood when I entered, hugged me. "I've been waiting for you to reach out." "You have?" she nodded. I kept notes. From the internship, things that didn't sit right, memos that disappeared, numbers that didn't add up. I wasn't brave enough back then, but I'm not that girl anymore. We sat. I told her everything. What they'd done to me, the doctored files, the fake leak, Clark's reversal, Gabe's investigation. She listened, face unreadable. Then she leaned forward. "I think I can help. But this goes way deeper than what they did to you, Elizabeth." My brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" She pulled out a folder. Inside were spreadsheets, marked up receipts, and email printouts. "They've been funneling expenses through shell nonprofits," she said, "disguising luxury expenses as charitable donations, inflating board stipends." I followed the trail during my final semester, but I didn't have the credentials to publish. Now she did. My stomach turned as she laid out the pattern. Years of tax avoidance, strategic falsifications, and cloaked payouts. "I can tie it all back to the firm," she said. "I have the records, and I want to publish this. But you'll need someone on the record," I said quietly. She met my eyes. "I was hoping it'd be you." I paused. The weight of it settled around me. They'd already destroyed my reputation once. Going public again, this time with criminal implications, would make me a target, but it would also make me undeniable. I'll do it, I said, but on one condition. Allison tilted her head. You don't pull punches. You name them. You tell it exactly how it happened. She smiled. That's the only way I know how. It moved fast after that. Interviews, cross-verifications, legal prep. Allison had built a network of whistleblower lawyers and nonprofit watchdogs over the years. She moved with precision and caution, and I, finally, felt something close to power. Not revenge. Not yet, but truth with teeth. When the article dropped 2 weeks later, it was a slow explosion. The headline read, "Legacy or Liability: How Harper and Sons Masked Millions Behind a Charitable Veil." They used my name, my story, the falsified file, the assistant's email trail, everything. And underneath it all, tax records, doctored receipts, and a years-long pattern of creative accounting. The fallout was immediate. The state tax board launched a review. The Ethics Commission opened an inquiry. Donors to the Harper Family Foundation pulled out within 48 hours. And my parents? They issued a bland, lawyer-approved statement about clarifying our record-keeping processes and, quote, respecting the integrity of ongoing reviews. But I knew what they were really doing. Scrambling, spinning, panicking. It wasn't enough to restore everything I'd lost, but it was a beginning. And for the first time, since that cursed dinner, people weren't whispering behind my back. They were asking for my side. They were listening. And I wasn't done speaking. The email came 2 days after the article went live. No greeting, no sign-off. Just a direct message from my father's lawyer. Ms. Harper, in light of recent press, we're prepared to discuss a resolution contingent upon your cooperation and silence. I stared at it, letting the absurdity of the tone settle. Cooperation and silence, as if my voice was some wild animal they hoped to trap and muzzle. I forwarded it to Gabe and Allison. He replied, "They're cornered." She added, "Don't respond. Let's draw the line on your terms." For once, I was not the one asking to be believed. I was the one setting the rules. We arranged the meeting in a sterile glass conference room at their firm's downtown office. Gabe came with me, seated just behind my left shoulder like a shadow of strategy. Allison insisted on attending too, this time as press, not participant. Her presence was a warning. If they twisted anything, the story would deepen. My parents arrived 5 minutes late, my mother in her pale blue suit, every hair lacquered into place. My father stiff in his chair, jaw clenched tight, as though the air itself offended him. "Elizabeth," my mother said, folding her hands, "this isn't necessary." I smiled. "Oh, but it is. See, you made me very necessary." We reviewed the conditions calmly. They wanted my silence. I wanted my future back. "I'll sign a non-disclosure about the internal finances," I said, "but not about the falsified personnel file. Or the public smear campaign. That part's mine to keep." They hesitated. I continued. "You'll retract all public and internal accusations against me. In writing, you'll release my share of the company's profits, retroactive from my dismissal date, and you'll agree not to interfere with the legal review of the foundation's finances." My mother opened her mouth, but my father raised a hand. His voice was low, clipped. "We'll agree on one additional term." I arched a brow. "You don't press criminal charges, you don't take this to court." Ah, there it was, fear, finally cracking through their polished resolve. "You're afraid of jail?" I asked. He didn't flinch. "I'm afraid of what this will do to your name as much as ours." I nearly laughed. "My name already drowned in the hole you dug." "Still," I nodded. "Fine, no criminal charges. But I want the formal retraction published publicly and signed." They exchanged a look. Silent communication honed over decades of power lunch diplomacy. "We'll draft it by end of week," my mother said. Gabe leaned in. "And the financial settlement?" "Transferred within 72 hours, my father replied. It wasn't affection. It wasn't apology. It was negotiation. But this time, I was sitting at the head of the table. They stood first. walked out without another word. And I didn't chase them. As the door shut behind them, I felt something sharp and clean shift inside me. This wasn't a reunion. It was a reckoning. And I hadn't just survived it. I'd orchestrated it. The press release hit the wire on a Wednesday morning. In light of recent developments, the Harper family acknowledges past miscommunications and retracts all previous internal claims against Elizabeth Harper. The family regrets the breakdown in trust and recognizes her professional contributions. No apology, just corporate sorrow and sanitized regret. But I still printed it out, framed it, not because I believed it, but because it was proof that I hadn't imagined the damage, that someone, on paper, was finally forced to say I wasn't wrong. The money hit my account that afternoon. 7 figures. Years of equity owed from the firm, plus backdated earnings, and a quiet bonus they hoped I'd see as hush money. But nothing about me was quiet anymore. Allison's story was picked up by national outlets. There were whispers of a federal audit. The board of the Harper Family Foundation disbanded. My mother resigned from her volunteer roles under the pretense of health stress. My father stopped showing up at the country club, and people who used to offer me side-eyed glances or too careful smiles now called me brave. As if survival was bravery, as if I had a choice. Still, the days were strange. No longer desperate, but disorienting. The adrenaline had dried up. The war was technically over, and yet I didn't feel victorious. I felt weightless, untethered. I'd spent months fighting to reclaim a home that no longer existed. What do you do after that? For a while, I tried pretending, taking meetings, accepting interviews. People wanted me to speak on justice, on workplace reform, on women's empowerment. And I did, because those were good things. But somewhere deep down, a quieter version of me whispered, "What now?" That question followed me into the evenings, where I sat alone in a high-rise I didn't decorate, looking out at a skyline that didn't know me. Then, one afternoon, a call came. A legal startup in Oregon had read about my story. They were building protections for whistleblowers and ethical violations across nonprofits and wanted to know if I'd consult. I said yes, and I moved within a month. A small place, cool air, no family photos, just space, and silence that didn't echo with accusation. I started again, not with revenge in my chest, but relief, that I could build something outside their shadow, something that didn't require permission to exist. And yet, despite it all, despite the money, the vindication, the articles, I still hesitated when I opened invitations from home. Weddings, holiday dinners, baby showers. Sometimes my name was handwritten, other times mass-printed. I never knew who truly wanted me back. And maybe that's the final twist. Sometimes, even after you win, you're still not sure if it's safe to go home. Because redemption and reconciliation, they're not the same thing. It came in a thick cream envelope, the kind my mother favored. Inside, a formal invitation with gilded lettering and a soft watercolor of the Harper estate embossed faintly in the corner. You are warmly invited to the Harper Family Winter Gala. Below that, a note in her handwriting. Elizabeth, we hope you'll come. Things are different now. Mom. I read it 3 times. Not because I didn't understand, but because I didn't trust what I was seeing. I hadn't spoken to her since the settlement. Not a call, not a word. And now this, an invitation into the house they sold, bought back under a trust, and redesigned like a mausoleum of reputation. I knew what they wanted. A photo op. A mended ribbon tied around months of chaos, something to show the neighbors and donors that the Harper name still held. And they wanted me to help them stitch it back together. I left the envelope on the table for 3 days. On the 4th, I called Brian. He answered with a cautious hey, like he wasn't sure which version of me would be on the line. I got the invite, I said. Yeah, he replied. I figured. Silence bloomed. Are they actually sorry? I asked. He exhaled. No, not in the way you want them to be, but I think they're scared. And that's something. I chuckled, dry. That's not comfort, Brian. I know, but I also know Mom's been asking about you more. Quietly, like she doesn't know how to say what she wants. That's not new. He didn't argue. Will you be there? I asked. Of course. I don't think I know how to leave. His honesty surprised me. I used to think he was spineless, but maybe he was just loyal to a fault, loyal to people who only knew how to love conditionally. "You should come," he added softly, even if just to remind them they don't own the narrative anymore. I didn't respond, not that day, but I thought about it. About walking through that door with no apology offered but every eye watching, wondering if I'd pretend nothing happened too. I thought about how forgiveness doesn't always look like reconciliation. Sometimes it looks like not needing their approval anymore. And sometimes it looks like showing up, not for them, but for yourself. On the night of the gala, I got dressed. Navy again, sharp shoulders, a little armor, hair back, no jewelry from the estate. At the front of the house, valet cars lined the driveway, candles flickered in curated wreaths. And when I stepped through the double doors, the crowd parted like a tide, unsure if it was receiving a storm or salvation. My mother saw me from across the room. She didn't smile, not at first, but she nodded, and I nodded back. Not a truce, not a reunion, just acknowledgement. I didn't stay long. I didn't need to. I'd taken the seat they never thought I'd reclaim. And when I left, I didn't look back, because I finally understood. I wasn't the daughter who needed to be welcomed. I was the woman who no longer required the door. 6 months later, I sat on a sun-drenched porch in Oregon, sipping coffee and watching mist roll off the pines. It didn't feel like a grand ending, just a new rhythm. Most mornings were quiet now. I worked part-time with the whistleblower advocacy group, drafting policy templates and mentoring women afraid to speak up. I spent afternoons walking trails, letting the silence stitch something inside me that ambition had once ripped wide open. Sometimes I still checked the news. The Harper Foundation never fully recovered. Its assets were reorganized, its trust dismantled. My father stepped down. My mother retreated from public life. No indictments came, but their reputation cracked in ways even money couldn't polish. And I became the ghost they couldn't quite outrun. People stopped seeing me as the fallen daughter. They started seeing me as someone who stood back up, but that didn't mean I healed cleanly. There were nights I still woke up with that dinner scene echoing in my chest. The wine glass, my father's voice, the way no one asked for the truth before deciding it. There were days I questioned whether it had all been worth it. Because the truth is, power reclaimed doesn't replace love withheld, and some scars don't fade. They just stop bleeding. Still, I wouldn't undo it. I wouldn't unspeak what needed to be said. I wouldn't unfight the storm I was shoved into. Because somewhere along the way, I stopped trying to get back in and started building something of my own. I was no longer the ideal daughter. I was just me. Messy, clear-eyed, a little tired, but unedited. And that, I've learned, is its own kind of home. So if you've been cast out, falsely blamed, or made to feel like your worth depends on silence, remember this. You don't have to knock on a door that never opened for you. You can build your own, stronger, quieter, but no less powerful. And maybe, just maybe, that's where the real legacy begins. Have you ever been blamed for something you didn't do just to protect someone else's image? Let me know in the comments. I'm listening.